Now I'm too old, and besides I don't have the need to fly anymore like I used to. When I was young, I stood over 6 feet tall, and my wings, when outstretched, spanned over 14 feet across. When I took them in close to my back, the scapula stood high over my head and shoulders, making me seem ever taller. Everyone who saw them was struck with awe. Children especially would sometimes come up to me and gently touch my chestnut-coloured feathers. Parents would sometimes stand back, shy yet anxious. They were a little afraid, I suppose. An audible gasp would come up from them all when I stood up, spread my wings, and effortlessly took off to the skies. I would look down at them, the children wailing and squealing, while the parents would peek their hands over their eyes, trying to follow my path through the glare of the splendid sun. It was a wonderful feeling, although at the time I suppose I took it all a bit for granted. I remember the first time I flew back home, my mother and father, God bless their souls, stood in the centre of a field of barley. I pushed my wings forward in front of me as I descended. It was the softness of landings, and as I stood there before them I smiled. They were both so pleased and proud to see me. My mother stood with her hands covering her mouth. She was so excited. My father gave me his usual strong handshake, and tired as I was, I told him of my long trip across the Atlantic. My mother's eyes widened when I told her of my sights that I had seen in Newfoundland, of the bitter cold in Greenland, and she laughed heartily when I told her of the children who gathered around me in the harbour of Reykjavik. As I sat in the kitchen, or rather my kitchen now I should say, I was very touched to see neighbours and friends come to visit, people I had not seen for a long, long time. My father asked me why I'd waited so many years to come back, even for a visit. I told him simply that I didn't know. One thing leads to another and all that. Feeling warm in the glow of the kitchen, I promised there and then to visit home once a year. You mean you're going to migrate, said Mr. Colligan jokingly, and everyone laughed, including myself. At first I decided that to go home for the winter months was the thing to do, but the weather across that cold ocean was just too much. No matter how many layers of clothing I put on, and no matter how fast I flew, I could never get used to it. So after the second year, I decided to go home during the summer months. My parents were usually in better form, people were home for the holidays, and the rain was soft and intermittent. Not to mention that the heat in Philadelphia was oppressive, to say the least. I will always remember that one particular trip I took as it flew high over the cliffs of Moher. The thick, cumulus clouds parted suddenly, and below me the vast patchwork of green fields stretched out before me like a newly woven quilt. I don't know why it struck me so. I had, of course, seen it many times before, but there was something about the light that day, the colour of the fields, the blueness of the waves beneath me that took my breath away. There in the sky, I felt like a child again. Over the years, the neighbours gradually stopped coming to visit when I arrived. The novelty had worn off, I suppose. And then that terrible day, as I descended in wide circles following the cool currents, there, alone in the field, stood my mother, dressed in a floral dress. Maybe it was best that he had died so suddenly, but there was so much I still wanted to say. Why did my mother not want me to move back, I wondered. Perhaps all along it was he who really wanted me home. I don't really know. After all, I had no special skills except that I could fly, but as my mother used to say, flying don't plough the fields. Still I tried. I lifted the heavy machinery for the labourers. I lifted bales of hay onto the trailers. Come to think of it, I'd even tried to sow some seeds, but it was too erratic. The wind blowing seed falling everywhere, but where I was supposed to. That day my mother laughed as I stood beside her. I pulled her close under my wing, even though I could feel that she suddenly became uncomfortable. I know she loved me, she just had a hard time telling me. And in a phone call in the night, my heart thumped against my ribs. I thought I would never reach home. I hardly stopped at St. John's, even though the autumn winds blew right through me. The field was unkept, long empty drills now, curving over the hill. Only two of the old neighbours attended the funeral, and I didn't recognize anyone else who stood there in the wet afternoon at a graveside. No one greeted me when I landed the last time, only a dog barked. He stopped when I folded in my wings, and as I looked straight at him, he cocked his head sideways. I wonder what my friends really thought when I phoned to say that I wouldn't be coming back. I'm sure they half expected it, all that arranging to sell everything, and then having to ship the furniture. What an ordeal that was. Soon, over time, I fitted in, I suppose. Every once in a while, I would fly the short distance to the village to pick up the groceries. Some of the new children from the housing estate would run up to me, but I didn't have the strength like I used to. I tried to take some of the smaller ones on a short flight, more like a jump really, over to the roundabout, but the parents were not too thrilled, and to be honest, my heart wasn't in it either. I stopped flying altogether soon after that. I kept my wings tucked in close behind me. Eventually, I had to tie them with a white sash, which I bought at Campbell's, in order to keep them secure. Then, I suppose, my muscles couldn't do it any longer. The operation was really quite painless when I think of it. They asked me in the hospital if I wanted to keep them, and I'm glad that I did. Many of the hours I spent in front of the fire looking at them neatly arranged on a white sheet in that beautiful wooden box that old Mr. Bellew had made for me. I did not feel saddened by them, quite the contrary really. They held so many memories for me, and much more good than bad. They were a connection to many things. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. I wonder what my mother and father would say now. They never thought, I suppose, that one autumn evening I would be standing in their garden, burning my God-given wings on a fiery pyre. It is such a still evening today. The rust-colored smoke is going almost straight up through the dim light of the tawny moon.